The date is October 17th, 11:54 in the morning, and the city of Los Angeles is moving the way it always moves. Cars crawling along the 405, tourists photographing the Hollywood sign, office towers in downtown catching the late morning sun. 250 miles beneath the surface of California, along a jagged scar in the earth known as the San Andreas Fault, pressure that has been building for over 300 years is about to find its release. This is the story of the earthquake scientists have feared for generations, the one they simply call the Big One. And this is the story of what happens when the ground beneath 40 million people finally gives way. The San Andreas Fault stretches nearly 800 miles, from the Salton Sea in the south to Cape Mendocino in the north, a boundary where the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate grind against each other at a pace slower than a fingernail grows. For most of human history, this slow, silent movement went unnoticed. But scientists at the United States Geological Survey have spent decades warning that the southern segment of this fault, the stretch running through the Coachella Valley and down toward the Mexican border,
has not ruptured in over 300 years. Dr. Lucy Jones, one of the most respected seismologists in the country, spent her career studying this exact scenario. And in the years before this day, she had told anyone who would listen that Southern California was not a question of if, but when. At 11:54 and 7 seconds, deep beneath the town of Bombay Beach, near the Salton Sea, a section of rock finally fractures. The rupture does not stay contained. It races northward along the fault line at nearly 2 miles per second, tearing through the earth beneath Palm Springs, beneath San Bernardino, beneath the eastern edges of Los Angeles County, continuing for nearly 200 miles before it finally exhausts itself somewhere near the Grapevine. In under 2 minutes, the ground has torn open across a distance longer than the state of Massachusetts, and the shaking that follows will be unlike anything the modern city of Los Angeles has ever experienced. The first waves reach downtown Los Angeles 9 seconds after the rupture begins. These are the fast-moving primary waves, subtle enough that most people mistake them for a passing truck. But the secondary waves arrive seconds later. With them comes violence.
Buildings constructed before the strict seismic codes of the 1990s begin to twist on their foundations. Older brick structures in neighborhoods like Boyle Heights and parts of Pasadena, buildings that survived the Northridge earthquake of 1994 with only cosmetic damage, now begin to crumble in ways their owners never imagined. Freeway overpasses, retrofitted after Northridge, but never tested against a rupture of this magnitude, begin to sway with an amplitude that engineers had only modeled in simulations.
Inside the California governor's office in Sacramento, word reaches Governor Gavin Newsom within minutes. Seismic sensors installed across the state as part of the ShakeAlert early warning system had detected the rupture at its origin point and sent warnings racing ahead of the shaking itself, giving some residents in Los Angeles nearly 40 seconds of advance notice. Enough time for school children to duck under desks, enough time for surgeons in the middle of operations to pause, enough time for train operators to hit the emergency brakes before the platforms beneath them began to move. But 40 seconds is a cruel amount of time. It is enough to know what is coming, and not enough to stop it.
Newsom activates the state's Emergency Operations Center within the hour, coordinating with the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services, the National Guard, and federal disaster response teams. But even with the best prepared state emergency system in the country, the scale of what is happening quickly outpaces the resources available to respond to it. The Los Angeles Aqueduct, which crosses the fault line in multiple locations and supplies nearly 70% of the city's water, ruptures in at least 5 places, cutting off water access to millions of residents within hours. Firefighters from the Los Angeles Fire Department, men and women trained for exactly this scenario through decades of earthquake drills, find themselves fighting fires with critically reduced water pressure. Watching entire blocks in older neighborhoods burn because hydrants that should deliver hundreds of gallons per minute now trickle out barely enough to fill a bathtub. This is not an unfamiliar horror to the city.
In 1906, San Francisco burned for 3 days after its own catastrophic earthquake severed water mains across the city. And now, over a century later, Los Angeles faces the same merciless irony, surviving the shaking only to be consumed by fire. The freeway system, the arteries that make Los Angeles function, becomes a graveyard of broken concrete. Sections of the Interstate 5, the primary corridor connecting Northern and Southern California, collapse near the Grapevine, severing the fastest route between the two halves of the state. The Antelope Valley Freeway, running directly across the fault, buckles in several places. Emergency responders, who would normally reach a disaster site within minutes, now find themselves navigating around debris fields that stretch for miles, on foot in some cases, because no vehicle can pass. In the hours following the earthquake, Governor Newsom addresses the state from the Emergency Operations Center, describing the scale of the disaster as unprecedented in modern California history, and requesting an immediate federal disaster declaration from Washington. Dr. Lucy Jones, watching seismic data pour in from monitoring stations across the state, understands something that most residents do not yet grasp. The earthquake itself, however catastrophic, is not the end of the danger. Aftershocks, some of them powerful enough to cause additional structural collapse, will continue for days, weeks, even months. Buildings weakened but still standing after the initial rupture become death traps as magnitude 5 and 6 aftershocks strike over the following 72 hours. Search and rescue teams, some flown in from as far as Washington State and Nevada, work through the night with thermal imaging equipment, listening devices, and trained cadaver dogs, searching for survivors trapped beneath the wreckage of parking structures, apartment buildings, and shopping centers that failed to withstand the shaking.
Economists working alongside FEMA and state agencies begin calculating losses that stretch into the hundreds of billions of dollars, a number that grows heavier with every passing day as the true extent of the destruction is mapped. In the weeks that follow, as recovery efforts stretch on and the nation watches the story unfold, a difficult question begins to surface in Washington and Sacramento alike. How much of this devastation could have been prevented? Building codes had been strengthened significantly since the 1994 Northridge earthquake, but thousands of older structures across Los Angeles, buildings constructed decades before those codes existed, had never been retrofitted, protected instead by decades of political delay, budget constraints, and the simple human tendency to believe that catastrophe belongs to some future that never quite arrives. Dr. Lucy Jones, in the aftermath of the disaster, becomes one of the most sought-after voices in the country, not to explain what happened, but to explain what she and her colleagues had been warning about for over 20 years. The earthquake, she reminds the public again and again in interview after interview, was never a matter of probability. It was a matter of time. California had known this fault was coming due. The only uncertainty had ever been the date. And now, that date belonged to history. Governor Newsom, standing before cameras outside a makeshift command post in the disaster zone, speaks of resilience, of the billions of dollars in federal aid beginning to flow into the state, of the long road to rebuilding that lies ahead. But beneath the official language of recovery lies a harder truth that seismologists have understood for decades. The San Andreas Fault does not rest. Even as Los Angeles begins the slow work of rebuilding, other segments of the fault, further north near San Francisco, continue their own silent, patient accumulation of pressure, waiting for a future date that no one can predict, but that geology insists will eventually come. The earth beneath California does not forgive complacency. And as the dust settles over a broken city, the question that lingers in every briefing room, every scientific paper, and every uneasy conversation among residents is not whether the big one will strike again somewhere along this fault, but simply, once more, when.